There's a guy called Professor Tim Kasser, who's at Knox College in Illinois, retired now, who did loads of research on this. So for thousands of years, amazing research on it. For thousands of years, philosophers said, if you think life is about money and status and showing off, you're going to feel like shit, right? It's not an exact quote from Confucius, but that's basically what he said. But weirdly, nobody had scientifically investigated this until Professor Kasser did a huge amount of research into it. And he discovered that the philosophers were right, that the more you think life is about money and status and showing off, the more likely you are to become depressed and anxious by a really significant amount. But what's happened is, as a society, we have become much more driven by those beliefs in the last 40 years, right? I mean, they dominate things like Instagram. Think about the values of Instagram, what they are, the implicit values of Instagram. But they dominate the whole society. You know, you talk to kids, what's your goal? I want to be a billionaire. What do you want to be a billionaire? Just want to be a billionaire, right? We've been taught, it's almost like we've been fed a kind of KFC for the soul. We've been trained to look for happiness in all the wrong places, through working hard at jobs we don't like, to buy shit we don't need, to display it on social media to make people jealous. And so people have been given a script for how to be happy, right? That's what we're told makes you feel good. They do it. It doesn't make them feel good. And they're like, well, there must be something wrong with me because I'm doing the stuff you're meant to do to be happy. And at some level, we know this isn't true, right? No one watching thinks they're going to lie on their deathbed and think about all the likes they got on Instagram and all the shoes they bought, right? That's not going to be, you're going to think about moments of love and meaning and connection. And something that really helped me during COVID was learning from an experiment that Professor Kasser did with a colleague of his, Nathan Dungan. And it's something I really recommend everyone do if they're interested in that rediscovery of meaning that you're talking about that's so important. And there's lots of things we can do about this, but this is one example. So Nathan was is a financial advisor in Minneapolis. And he advises people on like household budgets. And he was contacted one day by a school, a kind of middle-class high school in Minneapolis. And they said, look, we've got a real problem. We need some help. The kids at that school were becoming obsessed with getting the latest Nike sneakers, the latest iPhone, and often their parents couldn't afford it, and the kids were just losing their shit if they couldn't get it, right? And they said, will you come in and explain budgeting to these kids? So he came in and quickly realized these kids didn't give a shit about budgeting, right? He would explain budgeting and they'd be like, yeah, whatever, I need the iPhone, right? So what he did was a different experiment. He learned about Professor Kasser's work and teamed up with him. And they did this really interesting experiment. They got the kids and their parents to come to meetings. I think if I remember rightly, it was once every couple of weeks for 6 months. And the first time they met, they literally said to them, just write a list of everything you've got to have. And they didn't define what that meant. People said, what does it mean? They said, whatever you think that means. And of course, everyone says first you need food, you need a house, whatever, home. But quite quickly, people started to name things you haven't got to have, like the latest iPhone. The parents would often name things that no reasonable person has to have, right? Then they said to them, describe how your life would be different if you got this thing. So let's say the kids who talked about Nike sneakers, how much they wanted the Nike sneakers. What's interesting is none of the kids gave the apparent reason for Nike sneakers. None of them said, oh, I'm a basketball player and I want to be able to jump high. No one said that. They said things like, well, if I got the sneakers, people would envy me, right? People would want me to be in their group, right? It doesn't take long to get people to say this out loud before they realize, oh, who put that idea in your head that having a shitty little blue tick on your shoe means you deserve to have friends, right? But what's the most interesting bit was what happened next, where they said to them, okay, just discuss among yourselves and write about a moment in your life when you've had a sense of meaning and purpose. And different people name different things, right? I'll just say anyone watching, just picture something now. And they talked about it, whether it was taking their kids to the beach, writing, playing music, whatever it might be. And then they said, well, how can you build more of your life around these moments of meaning and purpose and less around, the junk values, which I think are a bit like junk food, that we're kind of inculcated in this culture all the time. And what was fascinating was, so they just met every couple of weeks and talked about their progress in moving away from the junk values and towards meaningful values. And what they found was just having these conversations, we don't have these conversations very often in our culture, just having these conversations led to a marked move in people's values, right? It really worked. And the reason I mention that in relation to what you're saying, Rich, is throughout COVID, in fact, before COVID, but during COVID as well. So once a month, I have two of my friends, and the first day of the month, we just have these conversations. We talk about what happened in the last month that was meaningful, and what were times when you were diverted onto junk values, and what in the next month do you want to look for? And obviously we've been doing it on Zoom because of the plague, and even now I really feel it, right? I've got this book that just came out, right? And I can totally feel there's two sets of values I can get into. I can get into, I think the things I learned for Stolen Focus will help people, right? And I think if other people learn about this, we can change things and make the world better. When I think about that, I feel really good. I think, I met these amazing people. I just told Rich about Lenore. Lenore's an amazing person. I feel really glad. I hope people go and look up Lenore and join her group, right? That makes me feel good. Or I can get into who's buying the fucking book? Mm-hmm. What do the reviews say, right? Who are the famous people who tweeted about it, right? And when I get into that zone, I feel like shit. Even when the news is good, right? Even when it's like, a book's selling really well. This famous person just tweeted about it. Even then, I feel like shit because that's a junk value, right? It doesn't mean anything, right? Whereas the meaningful stuff is, this person might be helped by this thing. That's meaningful.
Right.
The ego stuff is not going to help me.